Today, we are going to be inviting, I should say, the co-founder of the Right Project, who's called Kellie Dalton, and also Evelyn Oluwole, who is the client director at Takumi. They will all tell you much more about what they do, so I'm going to wait for them to introduce themselves properly, and in the meantime, Rachel and I will just add a bit of context to the subject. Before we go any further today, I would like to thank our sponsor, Klaviyo, an e-commerce marketing platform for brands of all types, shapes and sizes, from 111 Skin to Hummingbird Bakery and, of course, to FashMash. We use them for our email marketing, and we have been so impressed by the precision targeting that we're able to do, and also the really precise insights that it gives us into our audience. If you would like to give them a go, please use your free trial, which can be obtained at klaviyo.com/fashmash. That's KLAVIYO.com/fashmash, and you can try it for free from there. So Rachel, over to you. Do you want to give a bit of context about what we're looking at today?
So, a key topic in sustainability is, where does responsibility lie? Who should be leading the charge when it comes to driving change, and how can they do so to best effect? Now, the short answer is that it's a very, very complex and nuanced challenge, and therefore, very, very simply put, it needs everybody. Now, if you look at the climate crisis as a super wicked problem, that's one of my favorite terms. For anybody that doesn't know it, I'm not going to go into detail on it now, but please do go and look this one up, because I promise you it is quite an inspiring one, but also puts into context the sort of systemic picture that we're looking at here. Basically what this does is it references the idea that what we're talking about here is so huge, it's so systemic, as it said, it's so urgent, but also importantly, it doesn't have a central authority. So there's no one entity, there's no one person or government or even country that is responsible for the climate crisis or for solving the climate crisis. You know, it really means all of us have a role to play. Now, of course, we can say, you know, governments have the biggest role to play, but when you start to break that down, obviously that filters through to everyone. So included that within that are citizens, there are of course businesses, you know, fashion businesses in this case, there are the policymakers themselves, who by the way are also citizens and also shoppers and everything else, you name it. But so too, for the incredible power that they have, are influencers, and that is our topic for this evening. Now, I've been thinking about this for quite some time over the last little while, and I really believe there's an enormous opportunity here to really, really leverage those with these huge followings, particularly, and also micro-influencers as well, for the power that they have, to reach new audiences on the importance of this topic. Now, I say that through the lens of, and again, this is maybe a little bit more nuanced than what we're going to get into tonight, but I say that through the lens of not necessarily trying to drive behavior change. Now, that would be wonderful, you know, if we could convince everybody in the world through the power of influencers to change the way they shop and to ideally buy less and everything else, that would be wonderful. But actually what's more important and much more likely through this is that we bring along more people on the journey, we add more voices to the fold around what it is we want to change, and importantly have them start to demand better of both the businesses that they buy from, but also the governments that they obviously live under, you know, demanding better of those governments for change. And I think that's something that every single one of us, no matter our background, no matter where we come from, has the ability to do, because we all have a voice, particularly obviously in democratic nations. So that's something that I think is really, really important, and something that influencers can hugely help with, which is just bringing awareness and understanding and education to people around the importance of this topic. So this is what we focused on in our last roundtable, our focus roundtables, hence the name. We have an amazing group of members. As Rosanna has said, 2 of them are joining us shortly to talk about this. But we were talking about the new age of the influencers, you know, who they are, what awareness they have of sustainability, and what needs to happen to drive more of this. So Rosanna, I'm going to throw it back to you. I think what I'm most interested in thinking about here is, how do we actually get people onto this journey in the first place? You know, is it an obvious one for everyone? You know, we've been talking a bit around climate crisis, it's in the news a lot and everything else. Is it obvious for them to just be stepping in this direction? And I guess the other side of that, arguably, is what's holding it back otherwise? Because we're definitely not seeing that across the board. You know, that's not what's leading the conversation on Instagram right now.
I think it's easy when it comes to sustainability to say, well, the solution is, and the onus lies with those with a massive audience. And those with a massive audience should absolutely be talking about sustainability, because we live in a climate crisis. in reality today, influencers are split into two camps. At the one extreme, and I'm going to use extremes, there are the activists. They have real values, they have real ethos that hits all parts of their lives and obviously their content. And then at the other end, you have the influencers who are in it for the commercial opportunities. And they, in terms of commercial opportunities, probably see sustainability, if they see it at all, as a trend. And I know it's quite offensive potentially to a lot of people on this live today to say that sustainability is a trend, but a lot of marketers see it as that. So there are influencers, there are content influencer marketing opportunities in this trendy space this year, and no doubt beyond. First of all, this couldn't be a conversation about influencers if we weren't to touch on the Kardashian family. They have the biggest following combined in the world. Now, this will surprise you, Rachel, but Kendall Jenner...
desperate to know. I'm desperate. Rosanna,
I mentioned to Rachel earlier today that Kendall Jenner is doing something with the climate crisis, and her mind was slightly blown. Last night, it was announced that Kendall Jenner is going to be hosting a series of conversations entitled Climate Talks via Future Earth, which is a very active climate crisis platform, and a much followed one. But she's obviously bringing them her 1.75 million followers. Now, her first guest is the activist Wawa Gatheru, and they released some teasers of that conversation last night. It was interesting to me, just straight up, because Kendall is the host, but it very much looked like Wawa was leading this conversation. Kendall's emphasis was very much on just saying, I'm learning. Just like her specifically, she said that she found the climate crisis very intimidating. And then she said, in particular, this is such a bigger picture, and I'm the littlest part, but I need to do my part. Now, I would argue that with 1.75 million followers, you are not the littlest part. You have the potential to have a huge impact. And therefore, I'm going to take the positive from this and from her getting involved in this and think about the people that it could reach. Then, at the other end of the spectrum, there are the activists, and because of their values, they are actually turning down 95% of the deals that come to them. They choose not to take on, they choose really not to take on any brand work. After all, Rachel and I often say that sustainable fashion is a paradox, and for them, the tension that lies there is just too extreme for them to be able to embrace any branded content. More often than not, right now, there are those who are on a journey. It is one of progress, not perfection. And it should be applauded if they're going to share that on their platform. But there is an undeniable tension between sharing that journey one day and then the next day sharing a lot of swipe ups to fast fashion brands. Rachel, how do you think that tension can be resolved?
Well, this is it. And I'm glad you said that, and I love also that you dropped the Kendall Jenner news on me, because I didn't know that about the conversation series. And I went to her Instagram account. I was like, what is Rosanna talking about? And genuinely all I saw was her promoting some new collections that she's launching. So
it was only in stories. It was not worthy of a grid post.
Well, this is it. Which kind of says it all. But that is really interesting, because there is an inherent contradiction there, isn't there, in terms of, what are you willing to sort of promote for that swipe up versus, what the ethics that you're starting to talk about. And I know our guest that we're going to welcome in a moment will definitely have something to say about that. I do think there is a massive challenge here, which obviously comes down to that sort of credibility piece, authenticity piece. And there's the challenge both ways around, So on the one hand, there are those brands who are really focused in the space. They're trying to do much more in the way of supporting sustainable causes and demonstrating and proving how they're on a sustainable journey as well. And we heard from Evelyn, who were talking a little bit, she works for an influencer agency, that every brief that comes in at the moment now has sustainability and diversity and inclusion within it. And I think that's fascinating. It's huge progress, of course. We want everyone to have those things in those briefs, because that's absolutely the way that every brief should be structured, should be a part of everything that's going out there from a communication standpoint. But what happens as a result is that not everything we see is very authentic, because of that. It can't be in every single case, or certainly not from the start, I suppose. the other side of it, from an authenticity standpoint, that I'm more interested in are those that are not part of the conversation yet. So, you know, if Kendall is great, as you said, there's a lot of positivity in that she's stepping in that direction and bringing awareness to such a huge audience of people. But I have a concern around, or what I'm interested in, the concern that other influencers have themselves, and that is that there's a lot of fear around putting themselves out there on this subject when they're not deemed the experts in it. You know, Kendall said around this idea that she's on this learning journey, and I've heard this firsthand from a couple of people, you know, that have particularly large followings themselves. Turns out they know a lot on this topic, which has surprised me, if I'm completely honest about it. But they don't talk to it because of the fact it doesn't align with their, and I'm using their words here, you know, their working class backgrounds and their affordable fashion focus, because those things don't go hand in hand as far as they're concerned, and because they feel as though they don't have the right, again, their words, the right to preach to their audience about it. And that really worries me, if I'm honest, because as much as I'd rather that everyone talked about it, to sort of somewhat explain how important it is to everyone, I do think that sort of expectation that it has to be done in a perfect way is really, really wrong. You know, and actually, as you said, demonstrating this learning journey is much, much more. And I think all of this comes down to the fact that this fear that exists is because of that culture. And we've talked about it a lot on our focus sessions before, that fear around the cancel culture that exists and being called out on things because of the way, you know, that's how social media kind of is set up, that we don't give people the space to say, I'm figuring this out, but you guys, this is really important for us all to sort of be thinking about. You instantly just get pulled down being like, what do you know about it? And you also do a fast fashion line, so you don't have a right to say this. And that is really difficult because it doesn't leave any space for us to recognize that this is a process that we're all going through and need to evolve. So I don't know, how do you think we can get around that further? Because it is really hard.
Yeah, I guess so really it's the conundrum, where does the emphasis for education lie? Where does the responsibility lie? Is it with the brands? Is it with the influencers? I would say that the former do have a responsibility now to encourage and help influencers work through the changes crucial to our industry, and see what's important out of those to share with their audience. And it kind of there should be a duality now. To do this, the very basis on which social media culture is formed, as you say, needs to change. This is going to have to become a place for the journey and the progress, and not for the perfect selfie of afterwards in a field being a farmer. And we also need to stop thinking that that is the absolute symbol of perfection. I thought I would actually give an example from one of my clients whom I consult, Zalando. They launched the Influence Academy recently, the Influencer Academy, I should say, to phrase it properly. And actually, partly the reason why it was formed was because they were struggling to find influencers appropriate for their sustainability campaigns. It was either extreme, you know, the activists at the one end who, for various reasons, perhaps did not want to even align themselves with Europe's biggest fashion retailer, or at the other end, it was those who really weren't even interested in slow fashion. And so what they've done is teamed up mentors headed up by Claire Press, who I'm sure all of you know, and who has her brilliant podcast. But then also on this board of mentors are people like Arizona Muse. There's Dio Kurosawa, who is utterly brilliant and you should all go check out. And then they are teamed up with 12 content creators from across Europe, all passionate about fashion, all from Generation Z, which is the key demographic for Zalando. And these mentors are going to be working with them, and they will be very openly sharing this change. And perhaps it won't transform their platform completely, or perhaps actually they will discover a whole new area to what they do and want to focus wholeheartedly on transforming the industry and on climate change. But I think that it is a really fantastic initiative for a brand to take, and to take that proactive step. Right, I think it's time to bring in some experts, talking of and I think that Evelyn and that Kellie can really elaborate and bring so much more colour to this subject.
Thank you for having me. Hi.
Of course. I think the best thing would be, because I already mentioned your job titles, but I would love for you just to give a very short introduction to what both of you do.
Sure, yeah. Evelyn, do you want to go first?
Okay, I'll go first. Thank you.
Yeah.
My name's Evelyn Oluwole. I'm the client director at Takumi, which is the influencer marketing agency. And what we do is we connect brands with influencers across several social channels, including Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube.
Thank you so much. And Kelly, over to you.
Cool. Hi, everyone. My name is Kelly. I'm a sustainability strategist and I guess a general responsible fashion advisor to brands across all aspects of the industry. And what I do is I go into brands and help them to put strategies in place to, I guess, just make better choices across their whole business operations and right down into their product supply chains. So, yeah.
Thank you. Perfectly put, both of you, and a little more elaborated for our audience. Evelyn, beginning with you, I would really love to know from you how you are seeing the influencer landscape evolve recently, in terms of what brands are asking for when it comes to sustainability and the briefs that are coming in.
Yes, so definitely we've seen an influx, if you like, of interest in sustainability, and there's no surprise there with the events of the last year that has absolutely contributed to that. And also with COVID and the lack of ability to work with creative agencies, influencers have simply become the kudos. They've become the creme de la creme, which is exciting for brands. And so a lot of brands have started putting in strategies in place, which obviously includes diversity and inclusion, and sustainability is a part of that. And so when we're getting briefs, what we're seeing is they're saying that they want to work with influencers that have sustainability at the heart of what they're doing, which is exciting and is brilliant. But I think the challenge at times is that brands are not being specific about what that means to them and what that means as part of their strategy. And so therefore, when influencers do work with them, what they're missing is that harmony of union that brings the same message together. So you're aligned with an influencer that understands where you stand as a brand, and the influencer loves what you represent as a brand. That sometimes is a bit, there's a grey area there. So I think there's still a lot of work to be done. And that's why we at Takumi, we work directly with brands to really better understand what sustainability means to them. It's not just about getting an influencer who happens to have sustainability at the heart of what they do.
But isn't that, I mean, really what we're talking about there is just 101 on how to work with influencers in an authentic way, right? That actually doesn't even have to have anything to do with sustainability. That's just marketing. Yeah. Okay.
Absolutely.
Really interesting. Which kind of says it all, because what we're going back to here is the basic of how to do things in a really good way.
Absolutely.
That's fascinating. I mean, how from your experience then with working with these influencers and these brands and sort of, you know, facilitating those relationships and also obviously those campaigns that come out, how hard is it for them to really get that authenticity piece right?
I think it can be quite difficult. You know, influencer marketing is, you know, by far one of the biggest industry now today, and it's growing dramatically, and it's becoming a priority for marketeers. And I think they're still trying to find their feet with how they work with influencers. So it's really, there's this conundrum about, I want to work with an influencer, but I want to tell the influencer exactly what they need to do for me as a brand. And that isn't going to work, because the audience that these influencers are speaking to are very digitally savvy. They can see an advert from a mile away. If it looks like an advert, they're not going to buy it. And so brands need to trust influencers to really create content that looks and feels like the level of content that they share with their audience ordinarily. And so when we bring it back to sustainability, again, it's about giving the influencers giving them the freedom, the creative freedom to be able to look at the brief and then establish it and put it together the way that they feel that it's going to work for their audience. And I think when brands do that, when they allow influencers that creative freedom, they get really strong results. Absolutely. But they don't always do that. This is a problem.
I have to say, you clearly radiate authenticity. There are some mega fans of you on this room right now. Kelly, bringing you in, what is your view on the authenticity piece? Can influencers promote affordability and sustainability simultaneously?
And I'd like to know your opinion on Kendall Jenner on that very
note. I know, I was even shocked. I was like, what? Like Googling on the side when you said that. Oh, the affordability thing. I mean, it's just so difficult, isn't it? I feel like if you're an influencer in the space, there's something about this axis of education to selling and whether you want to have a deep or shallow impact on people and trying to position yourself somewhere along the way there. Because it's like Evelyn said, unless you live and breathe that message that you're taking on board, the audiences see straight through that, you know, and they can tell, like, do your actions on the next post follow up with that? And do you seem like you're genuine and trustworthy? And then if you sell a product, then it's like, oh, okay, it's not just the selling of the product and it's sort of an empty gesture. So I do think it's really difficult. But then I also think, to your point earlier on, Rachel, it's, you know, these audiences, because affordability in fashion, let's face it, it's gone through the roof. The only sector in the fashion industry that made an absolute killing last year during COVID was ultra fast fashion brands. And as kills me as a sustainability professional to say that, but that's the reality that we have to accept. But then I think for everyone who's involved in promoting any type of fashion, the other reality that you have to accept is those fashion models can only be built on the exploitation of people and the environment. And that's that we all have to sit with that reality in every job we do across the industry and educate ourselves. And then when we are a bit more educated, then try and make better decisions along the way in the power and the capacity that we have within our roles to do that. And I think influencers are no different in that respect. I mean, I do get that brands are very different in themselves because they have big comms teams that sit behind them and they can be kind of protected from an individual glare, where it's completely different for influencers. You're putting your whole self out there. But at the same time, I just think it's too important. It's the usual stuff. It's too important. There's not enough time. There's deep exploitation. And when you learn more, you have the power. It's the classic cliche of like knowledge is power. And it is. You have the ability to make a little bit more change. You know, even if you don't have a massive following, say you're a micro influencer up to ones with bigger followings, you can start to ask things, put standard in place for yourself. I'll make a mental note. I won't work with these brands. I'll work with these brands. I might ask a brand if I definitely have to work with them to pay my rent. Maybe I'll just ask them to support this charity or support living wage and supply chains or what, you know, just there's different parameters of things that you can do to push it forward, because I don't know. I feel like we're a long, long way off a sustainable, circular, regenerative, equitable, blah, blah, blah industry. But the reason we're even conversation now is because of the actions of so many individuals and the collective impact that have given this push and momentum. So I do think influencers, if you have a big audience, it is that idea of just being able to push things forward a little bit with the platforms that you have.
I really want to elaborate a little bit more here. When thinking about with some of the businesses with whom you work on transformation, do you think the responsibility should lie with the brands for education, a bit like that Zalando example I just cited?
Yeah, I mean, I love that Zalando example. Definitely brands should educate their influencers, people who are selling for them, and then their wider audience, their customers, goes without saying. But I do also think that brands themselves are on a journey. And their sort of guarantee teams are in the background scrambling and learning, and the space is moving so fast. I mean, the problems are terrible and we all know lots about them, but the solutions are coming quite thick and fast. So when you have businesses that were set up in that very traditional commercial model of profit first, they're all retrofitting all of these new things. Yeah. And it's like, you know, turning slow moving ships. And what you have is the teams in-house kind of not scrambling, but trying to pull together all these strategies with very complex information. And then we're also kind of looking at them going, well, you need to educate everyone. And they're like, oh, we're just learning like this as well. And not to let brands off the hook either, because when I say that, I'm talking mainly about kind of comms teams and sustainability teams. But this leads me up to a bigger kind of debate that you'd mentioned in the beginning, Rachel, around systems change, where I think it is a bit of a CEO shareholder thing, that if you are truly a purpose-led brand who wants to change, it has to come from the top. We can't, you know, look immediately to influencers and go, you need to educate our brand sustainability teams, going, you need to be the ones. There has to be the fundamental shift, which is part of a whole other sort of economic shift kind of conversation that we could have. But I think it's like Rachel said at the beginning in the introduction, that everybody has a responsibility. But if I was an influencer, I would take my power back. I would not be afraid. I mean, there's a difference about being transparent with your platform, But in terms of feeling afraid to be open, I would just go and take my power back. There is so much free information online and free courses that you can go and take. And you don't have to go and speak about it on your platform, but just go and know the information and don't be afraid of it anymore, because it is quite a complex subject matter. And I mean, I've been working in it so long, and every week I feel overwhelmed by the volume of information. But there's definitely basics that you can learn, and just, empower yourself and go and figure it out. And then if you want to, drip feed it out to your community and take everyone on that journey, because we're all on the learning journey together.
Yeah, it's true. It is so overwhelming, the volume, the volume of stuff about all of this. But yeah, I mean, I think we're all, even when we work really deep in this, constantly learning new things, but that's just the very nature of what we're doing here, because it is brand new, you know, in every single sense. Evelyn, I'd love your view on that education side of things, given where you work.
I have to say, Kelly, you're letting the influencers off easy. I mean,
these normally, I don't mean to go. Tell me.
I feel like influencers have a deep responsibility because they've decided to be influencers. Now we know that influencers is new, but it's not really. When you share any type of knowledge on any type of platform, you have a responsibility to the information that you're sharing. Therefore, if an influencer decides to work with a brand on behalf of a brand and to talk to whatever subject matter, so in this instance, sustainability, then they should go and do their homework, and they should make sure that they have all the knowledge, so that when their audience are communicating with them about that said partnership, they can articulately share how they feel about it. So I think even though, yes, the brand should absolutely take the responsibility in the education piece, those influencers that they work with should also take their audience on a journey of what they're going through. And so even if they're early days, you know, they haven't got to the stage where they're doing slow fashion season, fine, but they're just kind of wanting to really change their way. They need to take their audience on the journey with it, and they need to be able to take responsibility for being a part of that narrative. Because let's face it, most of these influencers are getting paid. And if you're getting paid, you're paid to do a job, and you should do it well.
Well said.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I mean, I think it's interesting, isn't it? Because I guess there's the ones that are on the journey, you know, they're there. They need to do their homework, and there's all this extra responsibility. And then there's those who maybe know things about it, as I mentioned earlier, but are not talking about it whatsoever. They're not doing partnerships aligned to sustainability because they don't feel that it's their responsibility whatsoever. And that's where I like actually what both of you said, because I think there's some crossover there where it's like, guys, this is becoming too big an important topic to just completely ignore. And so there's a responsibility for the brand to play a part in terms of bringing people along on that journey that maybe weren't even considering it or aware of it, but also on the influencers to sort of wake up to really the sort of scale of what's happening. And then I do think it's underpinned by that piece that we were saying around the cancel culture and the fear of being called out or not being an expert on something. And I don't know what you guys think on that topic, but for me, I do think that's one of the biggest barriers here, that people just aren't willing or too nervous to share that they're not experts in this, but they can't be.
I totally agree. I totally agree. Sorry, I was just going to say, I totally agree with that point, because the thing is, with influencers having the responsibility and being, you know, this is who I am and I want you to follow what I'm talking about, there is obviously that backlash, right, that comes with it. There's always going to be someone that's in your audience that's going to say, excuse me, you don't know what you're talking about, let me correct you here. And no influencer wants to be a victim of that. So for them, they just want to shy away from it. And I'm talking generalistic here, not all influencers are such, but for a lot of them, they don't want to get on the wrong side of it. And you know why it's important? Because brands also don't want to work with influencers that have had backlash, right? True, so they need to protect their brand. Good point. There is this thing of, how do I get myself involved because I genuinely care and I really, really want to go on this journey, but then I don't want to lose out on the monetary opportunity.
Is there something though about normalizing that whole thing about, what is it that it's always up on Instagram, but normalize your opinion when presented with, normalize changing your opinion when presented with new information, and something about trying to embed that when you're communicating about sustainability. Because Evan, if you are asked a question, say like, oh, recycled polyester, you can't do that because microfiber shedding or something, let's say, and everyone goes, you just be like, oh, great, I actually didn't know about that. Exactly. Tell me about that. Yeah. And engage the audience to share information. I mean, I'm being very idealistic here in saying that because I know cancel culture is a huge issue, but I just think in sustainability, we, as like we've said 10 times, but we're all learning so fast every single day. There is no one person, I think, in the world who could stand up there and know everything about this broad umbrella of sustainability. I can't do that in my work. I go into brands and they'll ask me about something. I'm like, I don't know that, but I'm going to find you an expert who does. Yeah. And I just go off, find the expert. They go speak to the brand instead. And I just go, my brain is full. I'm sorry, here's somebody else. Like...
I love that. Yeah, the normalizing piece is so important. And I love Erin Smith has put in the comment, leaders are learners. And that's such a nice phrase. So true. So true.
How will brands manage the issue of overconsumption alongside influencer marketing?
And can I just give an example quickly here? I have one example that I refer to a lot, which is when you have a very sustainably minded influencer. There's now obviously a lot of them. They really talk to this subject. They're brilliant at it, but their grid and their stories are full of newness all the time. It's like constant, buy, but do it sustainably. And that I literally am like, I don't quite know how to process this because
or not even necessarily do it sustainably.
No, true.
An overwhelming number of swipe ups and gifts.
So many gifts.
So how does one manage, how do brands manage this issue of overconsumption?
So I would say, just coming from an influencer marketing perspective and the way that we work with brands is, this is why it's really, really important to define who you're working with by looking not just at what they are doing today, but looking at what they've been doing, say, for the last 12 months, looking at the content that they're sharing, the blogs that they're sharing, the conversations that they've been in, because then you will define whether that influencer is authentic. And that's something that we do at Takumi, because we're plugged into first party data. We can get all that information about the influencers so that when we present a said influencer to the brand, we know that they are right for them. So they're not going to get the backlash that comes with, oh, this isn't a right influencer to work with because yesterday she just did this. We would have done all of that on work on behalf of a brand. So I think brands need to really, move away from looking at, oh, she's got 170,000 followers, she's got 1.77 million followers, but really kind of look into their historical data and what they stand for from an historical point of view. That's incredibly important, especially when it relates to sustainability.
I mean, I can chip in here just because I work in this space too. And I can say it is really hard because going back to 10 years ago, bloggers, by definition, they were there to talk about newness, just like fashion editors were. Yeah. That is the purpose that they, and I know some of the ones that we're thinking of, that is their purpose, that's what they...
It's also their livelihood.
Yeah, and it's so a magazine, the editors have built that magazine on newness, and likewise bloggers built their brand on newness. So it's quite a mind switch now. If their content isn't, here's this brand who's just released this, here's this brand who's just released this, look at my new... Then what is their content? What are they creating? What are they doing each day? What is their new magazine editorial policy going to be? And I think that's something that they need to decide, because I think kind of like at the beginning of lockdown, when influencers could no longer fill their grid with travel pictures and glamorous parties, they had to decide quite quickly what were they going to fill it with. And I think it's similar now. If you're not going to be putting in loads of newness, what's it going to be?
Yeah.
Well, my little mind gets to I'm probably getting really granular now. I'm like, right, targets in place, people. Next year, we're only going to do 50% newness, and what's the other 50% content going to be? And solutions, so and just do, because of course we want everything to change overnight, but that's not going to happen. So is it a case of working down the newness in line with all of the solutions that are happening in the industry at the same time? Because soon there'll be more circular design solutions or secondhand reselling platforms or whatever it is. There'll just be way more options as the years kind of roll on. So do you get on board with the strategy like that and start to do that? I think that would be a good place to start if I was a sitting magazine editor right now, looking at all my new clothes content, or an influencer with a grid like that.
I absolutely love that idea of setting targets. And I think, Rachel, if you have anything else to add, but I think actually that's a really good note on which to end.
I agree. Yeah,
well,
hugely.
Thank you all so much for joining us. You were a really interactive audience this time, which I loved. No doubt, partly thanks to Evelyn's mega fans. Thank you both so much, Kellie and Evelyn, for joining us. I really think we got to kind of the crux of the matter there, almost more than we did when we spoke about this earlier in the week. So thank you. And finally, a big thank you to our sponsor, Klaviyo. Please do go check them out at klaviyo.com/FashMash. We will see you all again soon. Have a lovely evening.
Thanks so much, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.